Me? I hope so. I'm going to stand in front right like this.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yay, thank you. So, Beverly, thank you very much for introducing me. It's a thrill to be able to talk to folks during Native American Heritage Month. November is Native American Heritage Month. And I always try to do some kind of a presentation during November to let people know that this is Native American Heritage Month, but also to share with people about Native peoples in Kentucky. When I first came to Kentucky in 1977, I was told that Indians never lived here permanently, but only hunted here. And I thought perhaps my time in Kentucky would be rather short. 40 years later, I'm still here. Native peoples, the evidence of Native peoples are scattered all across Kentucky. And today, I'm going to incorporate information about some of the objects in the site at Flora Cliff so that it becomes more concrete and tangible for you all who have been to Flora Cliff before, or maybe are thinking about coming to Flora Cliff. It's a thrill to think that there are old trees here as old as when the very, very last Native peoples were living here in the 1600s. There is natural heritage here and human heritage here on this one landscape. And I want to share with you some things that will give you a deeper sense, perhaps, of the human history here. Like Beverly said, we are going to be talking about Flora Cliff, and I'm going to be contextualizing Native people's diverse lifeways, focused specifically on the bluegrass, and I'm going to be spending more time on the time periods linked to the objects that have been found at Flora Cliff. Not that I'm going to ignore the other guys, but I'm not going to spend as much time. Okay, so just to orient yourselves here, this is the first half of Kentucky's Native American timeline. And here's the second half. From a certain perspective, the longest single period of Kentucky history is the history of Native peoples in this landscape. And I'm going to be talking about these four periods and the one during the eve of written history. These are the eras, these are the time periods when Native peoples were the only ones who lived here or the main ones who lived here. Okay, so the first period I'm going to talk about is the very, very earliest folks who came, 14,000 to 10,000 BC, the very first hunter-gatherers. These folks are small family groups who have come down across, well, not one family group, it would have been a very long trek for a single family group, over a period of centuries or maybe even 1,000 years. People from Siberia, from Asia, came across the Bering Land Bridge and down into North America. And you can see the larger image there. I've highlighted Kentucky. So they came along the ice-free corridor and down into Kentucky, following the rivers. These Native peoples lived in an environment. I mean, you see how close we are to the ice sheet. This is the Pleistocene, the Ice Age. It's a different Kentucky environment than what we know of today. And so these small groups of people came into Kentucky following the rivers, moving from west to east, hunting large animals. Oops, sorry. Hunting large animals, the mastodons, mammoths, the megafauna, and smaller animals and collecting plants as well. You can see from this map, they would cluster or focus on particular areas along these rivers. One in particular, for example, is out in sort of southwestern Kentucky, along the Cumberland and Little River. These folks were exploiting locally available rocks, chert or flint. Later in time, you can see the second slide, the one or the picture, the one on the right, how from those initial places, people established themselves, and then families and groups grew to fill in the landscape. I expect that the closest place that an archaeological site of this time period has been documented is the Clay's Ferry Crevice, which would not be too far from Flora Cliff. Because these people lived hunting and gathering lives, they ranged across long distances and lived so long ago, evidence of them is really very, in central Kentucky, is very, very limited. And the most diagnostic stone tool that these folks made and used was the Clovis point, which you can see there on the right hand of your slide. It's diagnostic because of the flute or depression or valley that runs from the bottom of it all the way to the top. These folks, these very first hunter-gatherers, their descendants were the later hunter-gatherers, and they lived in Kentucky from 10,000 to 3000 BC. These folks lived in a Kentucky that was changing its environment as the ice retreated and the mastodons and mammoths went extinct. Different plants and trees and environment like more what we have today came to be in central Kentucky and in Kentucky in general. And along with these new plants, this change in forest regime, came different animals, the animals that native peoples would hunt for the rest of the time, and European settlers would hunt, and people today hunt as well. Deer, bear, elk has been reintroduced, but native peoples hunted elk. They fished, they collected freshwater mussels. They were really into turtles. You can see the guy in the center with this turtle. Also smaller mammals. These folks really knew the landscape like the back of their hand. They called it home. It wasn't strange to them. They knew the resources and knew how to exploit them. These folks developed a kind of weapon system called the atlatl or spear thrower. The spear thrower tool is at the bottom of this slide, and the way somebody uses it is shown on the top. What this means is that most people think that these are arrowheads, and these later in the archaic or later in this period are arrowheads, but they aren't. These are all spear points used with this particular kind of weapon system. Frankly, the longest used human weapon system in human history. You can see how it's a multi-part object with a hook and a balance or a banner stone, and you hook the spear, the bottom of the spear, into the spear thrower or atlatl, and then launch it in the way you can see there. Archaeologists focus on these kinds of tools and their shapes to determine the ages of the campsites that these hunting and gathering peoples lived at. Sometimes they lived in places for a longer period of time than others. They and the buildup of debris and trash illustrates that. Other times They just ranged across the landscape, moving and staying not very long in certain places. What this means is almost in any plowed field in Kentucky, you are going to find evidence of these people and the chips of flint or chert that they've left behind. Remember the one in the circle here? That's one that's very similar to the point that was recovered from Flora Cliff. These points are also spear points, but these are the style that were made much later in time. Remember, the time period of this is 8 to 3, and so that's a long, long period of time. And over time, these spear points change their style. Here are the kinds of animals that they hunted, and they collected nuts, walnuts, hickory nuts, butternuts. They collected plants for their fruits of plants. They used the plants not only for food, but also for the raw material for baskets and slippers. They made fabrics from these plant fibers and inner bark of trees, mats, sandals, and you can see cordage, and you can see an example of this on the lower right. Also, the plants served as ready-made raw materials for dyeing these yarns, these fabrics that they made and wore. So I don't want you to think that Native peoples back then only wore animal skins. You can only imagine how uncomfortable it would be in the humid ancient Kentucky, like humid regular Kentucky, walking around in skins from top to bottom or from side to side. Here in the left-hand side is a graphic illustration of the movements that these hunter-gatherers would do across their landscape, their homeland, these small groups. Seasonal camps, berry gathering places, seasonal camps. So they would move from place to place with the seasons. Rock shelters served as a place to stay, larger, more intensively occupied places along rivers. So it occurs to me that at Flora Cliff, is this the next one? No, not yet. Okay, in just a minute. Okay. It seems counterintuitive, but the truth of the matter is, irrespective of how long ago humans live anywhere, they are always about looking to somebody else has something they want, and if they can trade for it to get it, they will. Entrepreneur, I think, is the definition of human, that in addition to being political and argumentative. And it doesn't mean it's, 2020. It can be millennia ago. Native peoples traded for things that they wanted. You can see in this slide examples of things that these ancient hunting and gathering peoples, even though they didn't stay in one place necessarily for really long, would trade for copper. They would trade for barite. That's the sort of a circular oval thing in the center with the 2 holes drilled. And they would trade for certain kinds of stone to make the ornaments that they wore and for the things they used in their ceremonies. I don't want you to think that hunter-gatherers, because their technology isn't or wasn't nearly as necessarily complex as ours is today, that it in any way reflects a simpler lifestyle, a less complex social organization, or economics or politics. Okay, so here's Flora Cliff. And as Beverly said, this is a sort of tucked away little spot. The reason why it's a nature sanctuary is because people who were farmers didn't find it particularly good for farming. Well, that's not a problem for hunters and gatherers. In fact, if you take a look at this, It's really not bad at all. You've got the resources along the Kentucky River. Now, I will say it's a very small floodplain there, but you've got a little creek coming in. You've got resources that you can find in the river, along the creek, along the slopes, and up on top of the ridge. And also, please note that the ruggedness of the Flora Cliff Sanctuary per se is sort of gets more gentle and less rough as you move away from the Kentucky River. I could see how Native peoples could come here as a part of their seasonal round in a homeland that would include this landscape here that we know of as Flora Cliff. And in fact, this point on the left, a Kirk side-notched point, was found near Elk Lick Falls. When I say heavily resharpened, what I mean is take a look at the proportions of the bottom of that point to the top of the point or the blade. And let me back up a little here. I hope I don't make you seasick. See this little guy in yellow at the bottom? He is supposed to be like the guy over on the left, the tan one, same bottom, but look at how long the blade of that one is. That little guy wasn't made that little. He was resharpened by Native folks, resharpened and resharpened and resharpened and resharpened. And as it was resharpened, the Native peoples were removing stone, and so the blade shrunk, even though the base of it stayed the same size. Archaeologists who specialize in the analysis of stone tools will explain to you that sometimes Native peoples would retouch, resharpen, rework these stone tools because the tool itself was made from a particularly excellent piece of chert. Now, this particular spear point, is made out of boiled chert. How do I know it's made out of boiled chert? Well, it's because my friend who knows chert told me so. But I know the reason why it's called boil. It's because that kind of stone, that kind of chert, occurs either as nodules or layers in the boil limestone member. Central Kentucky is underlain by limestone. Chert occurs naturally in limestone. It can occur as an outcrop. It can occur as nodules in creeks that have eroded out and then been taken by creeks, rolling them down the drainages. If you want to think of it this way, Central Kentucky is a Kmart or Walmart of chert options. Perfect place to live. They've got marvelous opportunities for making their chipstone tools. It's not just spear points either. It's drills, it's scrapers, it's drills, scrapers, burins, which are engraving tools. So this particular kind of tool, this kind of stone is a good kind of stone that these folks would have selected to use. Sometimes the best stone, sometimes stone that wasn't quite as good, but they would heat treat that chert to enhance its knappability. These people knew their homeland, they knew their resources, and they exploited them marvelously. Now, let me show you this other map. See the dot at the bottom where Elk Falls Creek runs into the Kentucky River, that little dot? That little dot is where we documented an archaeological site. We got a phone call from a friend who said, hey, you guys need to talk to the folks at Flora Cliff. They've got questions for you. They found some freshwater mussels in a place that was below the ground. What is up with that? And we're like, So David Pollock and I went out with Beverly and Josie and a couple other folks, and we took a look. And sure enough, what we found were fragments, chips of flint or chert, and some freshwater mussels, and a portion of a scraper, not a spear point that could have told us how old this was, but I'm just guessing, based on the fact that these later hunter-gatherers lived in Kentucky for the longest period of time, I'm just guessing that this may have been a site where these later hunter-gatherers lived. And the plants, excuse me, the type of mussel shell that was identified was this guy. And my screen sharing means I can't read it. I hope you guys can. Okay, here's what's really cool. And I don't know if you guys know this or not. I just find it the coolest thing. As an archaeologist, you know, I nerd out on this biology thing. Okay, a malacologist friend of mine years ago said, well, Gwynn, I can identify the freshwater mussels in the archaeological sites that you've excavated. I have no problem with that. And from that, I can tell you what fish were available for the native peoples. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you know, of course, don't you, that the little baby mussels are hosted by these fish. And even if you don't find the fish bones in your archaeological site, you can say that these kinds of animals were there and that native peoples could have exploited them. Well, how cool is that? Okay, so it's not surprising that this particular kind of freshwater mussel found there near the river will explain to malacologists the nature of the substrate, the kind of water that was there. I don't think I need to remind you that the Kentucky River is not a free-flowing river anymore. It's one long pond or one long lake. But back when native peoples were here, it looked a lot different. And to imagine going down to the creek and seeing a fresh, clear Kentucky River, fishing there, living there, collecting plant foods and fish and animals. In preparation for my talk, I asked Beverly if she could share with me a list of the plants that had been documented. And she said, are you kidding me? Of course I can. This is our assignment. We document, we inventory this. This is what we do. And so what I did was check to see what kinds of plants that had been recovered from archaeological sites in central Kentucky to see what similarities and differences there were. And I was really thrilled to see that the same kinds of plants, trees, and seeds of wild plants that we found in the archaeological sites are still there at Floor Cliff. Hickory and white ash, walnut and slippery elm, soft maple, Kentucky coffee tree, beechnut, and the plants like smartweed and grape and pokeweed, chokecherry and pigweed and pawpaw. So there are certain things at Flora Cliff that the native peoples wouldn't recognize, but some of these plants they would, because you all who work and volunteer at Flora Cliff have documented them. So there's that connection too with the native peoples. Okay, the next people, the descendants of the hunter-gatherers, are hunter-gatherer gardeners. And they were in central Kentucky from 3000 BC to AD 1000. These folks are gardening. And I don't want you to think that what you're seeing here is corn, beans, and squash. That comes later. Look carefully. You can see sunflower there. and other kinds of plants. They're using a hoe over there on the left-hand side. They've got their houses. They're building their mound. These folks, their way of life is unique and different, or maybe I should say an extension of the hunting and gathering of their ancestors, but they've added growing plants to their food repertoire. In addition, these folks lived in more permanent settlements, more permanent villages, and they built burial mounds. Now, we're not going to find this at Flora Cliff. I'm sorry, I really just do not think we're going to find mounds at Flora Cliff. Having said that, it's possible that points, spear points like these, could be found at Flora Cliff. And let's not forget that these hunting, gathering, gardening people are still hunting and gathering, and they'll be going out from their settlements to hunt and still using the spear thrower or the atlatl. So just because there aren't mounds there, just because there aren't places where they might have had their village, doesn't mean that they might not have exploited the plant and animal and resources in what is now Flora Cliff. We just don't have any evidence of it yet. I say yet. Okay, same animals and plants. However, these folks are gardening using fire to clear the land, to plant their gardens using a digging stick. What you see in the upper left-hand corner of this slide are the places that are world hearths of plant domestication. So if I said the Fertile Crescent, where wheat and barley was first domesticated, you would understand where I'm talking about there in the Middle East. Corn domesticated in Mexico, rice in China. The red dot, the red star, is the eastern woodlands, and in particular, Kentucky has documented or has offered enormous amounts of information regarding this. And this is the Eastern Agricultural Complex. Starchy and oily seeded plants, native plants, along with squash. The starchy ones are goosefoot and maygrass. The oily ones are sunflower and marsh elder. And these native plants were domesticated by the native peoples. By domesticating the plants, they domesticated themselves, because as you grow those plants, you have to spend time and you have to pay it forward, as it were, to come back and tend these plots to ensure that you have a decent harvest. Now, how did these folks do this? Well, if any of you have ever had a garden and thrown out Halloween's pumpkin guts into your garden or your compost heap, the plants will grow by themselves. You don't have to do much encouragement. Once you notice this, and native peoples noticed everything, they had to, because they didn't have any social security net except themselves and their knowledge of plants and animals and the resources around them to live. They saw what happened. And so over time, they selected the best plants with the seeds, the seeds from the plants that they liked the best, that grew the best. And in time, they domesticated the plants. And we know that they're domesticated because the seed sizes change, their morphology changes, the seed coats the size of the plant, seed. So what you see here is goosefoot or Chenopodium. Goosefoot or lamb's quarters is on Flora Cliff today. And the brown or the black seeds in the center are what they look like when they've been charred, and archaeologists have found them to analyze. Here is a good example of how you can tell the difference between wild sunflower, domesticated sunflower, and modern domesticated sunflower. That burnt one in the center. Archaeological sites, particularly in central Kentucky, or in Kentucky in general, in the humid eastern woodlands, stuff has to be charred for it to preserve. It's not like it's not like Egypt or anything like that. There are two contexts in Kentucky where uncharred plant remains can be preserved, and that is caves and in rock shelters. Sunflower, erect knotweed, How exciting is this, you all? Recently, and I say recently meaning within the past 8 years, archaeologists documented at a hunter-gatherer gardener site in Garrett County the earliest domesticated erect knotweed in the world. Kentucky is on the map, people. What time is it? Okay, good. So I said these hunter-gatherer gardeners are important. Their life is different because they are growing plants. Their life is different because they are making a different kind of technology than their ancestors did. I don't want you to think that there weren't any containers at all before Native peoples made pottery from locally derived clays. But those containers would have been wood or skin or net bags or something like that, and those don't preserve so well. However, the hunter-gatherer gardeners were the first ones to make pottery. Some people suggest that the reason why they made pottery was because they had turned to gardening and they were preparing foods differently than they had before. The vessel on the top is decorated with nested diamonds. This is a particularly unique kind of decoration found only in mound sites and most commonly in Kentucky. And you can see the styles of the pottery as they change from earlier at the bottom to more recent in time at the top. Here's an example of one of the burial mounds. This one was excavated during WPA times during the Depression in Boone County. These mounds are burial mounds. They grow over time with the addition of additional graves. What you see on the bottom left is an illustration of what one of the log tomb graves might have looked like. This is using information from archaeological research at a site in Montgomery County. I think you might, let's see, the closest mounds to Flora Cliff would be in the Silver Creek drainage. There's quite a number of hunter-gatherer gardener mounds in the Silver Creek drainage in Madison County. This would be west, a little bit west of Richmond. The objects in the bottom right-hand corner are the kinds of items made from copper or fabrics in the that red object in the upper left-hand corner. Sometimes, because of the preservation environment, the fabrics that the Native peoples made were preserved in these mounds, and that's an example of one from a mound in Bath County. The hunter-gatherer gardeners still living in villages, now no longer towards the end of this era, now no longer building burial mounds, but still living in villages, though the villages are larger. And many in central Kentucky are circular with a plaza. Here is a family group. Now is when the bow and arrow begins, around 700 AD. You see the woman making pot, and the woman standing making fabric. There were no true looms here in Kentucky. They used a technique called twining. Circular, had these houses look not too different from the ones that we saw at the beginning of this hunter-gatherer gardener period of time that we're talking about. It's just that these later villages are larger. They're the houses encircle a plaza, and the plaza is a place where ceremonies and social events and group gatherings for political considerations would take place. The bow and arrow is a different kind of tool than a spear thrower. And so the point, the stone point, is different than a spear point. This is the technology of the bow and arrow. I think it's important for you all to know that, relatively speaking, when people in Kentucky learned about the bow and arrow, man, the atlatl was history. Everybody really went quickly for the bow and arrow. Some people have suggested that that may have been some kind of migration of people from the Northeast down into Kentucky. Other people say, no, you don't have to migrate. You just have to have a good idea that can spread like wildfire through the land. And when you see a technology that's particularly good, better, people are going to adopt it, or may adopt it because they see it has ways to benefit them and their lives. It's this pottery here in the top part of the slide that these later hunter-gatherer gardeners made, but still they're using fire to open up places on the land to grow their Eastern agricultural complex plants, and hunting the same animals and that kind of thing as their ancestors. Beverly, do you want me to stop? Are there any questions? I can't see any kind of chat or questions or anything like that. And we had said that we would, and I've just been chatting along and I thought, wait, maybe somebody's had a question. So should I stop now and see if there's any questions to answer?
Sure, we can pause. There are 3 questions that have come in.
Okay.
Let's see, there's one. Has anyone estimated population density of Paleo Indians based on number of points found?
Ooh, that's a good question. Not that I know of, but then I'm not tuned in to the Paleo Indian research. Now I can say this, and this will be a little bit of archaeology history. Okay, so the Paleo Indian, particularly Clovis, I don't know if you guys have heard of Clovis, New Mexico, but that's the reason why the Clovis Point is called the Clovis why the Clovis Point is called the Clovis Point, because it was found, the first time it was found and described as Clovis, New Mexico. And for decades, archaeologists were all about Paleo Indians out in the Southwest, hunting animals, the mammoths and mastodons, blah, 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 and out there on the plains and so forth. Okay. Then people started doing a little bit more serious work in the Southeast. And what's really wacky is there are greater numbers of Clovis and the eastern kind of paleo points, which are called Cumberland fluted points, or Daltons. There's a Dalton, Georgia, and the Cumberland River. There are greater densities of these kinds of Paleo Indian points in the Southeast than they are in the Southwest. One of the problems with archaeology is if you're the first one to document stuff, everybody thinks that's the beginning of it. And what has taken a long time to change people's minds, but finally with putting the recovery of these particular points into geographical information system data, and then databases, and then creating maps to see where the distributions are, lo and behold, the Southeast is a hotbed of Paleo Indian sites. So I don't know if the density of points has been used as an analog for the density of indigenous people in the place. But certainly there are more of these kinds of points found in the Southeast than there are out west.
Right, so there's also a question about an object that was found in a Kentucky creek, and she sent us a photo, so I'm going to save that one for the end, and maybe we can project it to you once we're not screen sharing.
Okay. Now, I will say before my talk, a nice man sent me a picture of 3 spear points that he had found, Mitchell, whose last name I can't remember, and the time period of the later hunter-gatherers and all of that discussion that that period, that's the age and the people and the culture of his points. So Mitchell, that was your time period right there, and I forgot to tell you. Sorry.
Right. So the next question, how did they prepare goosefoot seeds?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. And as you can imagine, here, let me go back a little here to look at the goosefoot seeds. I mean, look at them. They look like, I mean, they are tiny. This, you got to have a lot of them just to have a little handful to snack on. Okay. Paleoethnobotanists or archaeobotanists have studied planting regimes. They have studied and attempted to replicate how these plants were harvested for the seeds, how the seeds were prepared, what they were eaten in, and so forth. One of the things that's kind of wacky about goosefoot is, and there's a botanical name that means the seeds don't come ripe all at once. Beverly, what's that name? Do you know that name? I want to say itinerant or indeterminate, but that's neither of those are right.
I know there are some botanists in the audience, so maybe they can chime in on the chat.
Okay, good. Okay, so you can't, it's not like corn, where you harvest the corn cobs and do your thing, that's it. Okay, so the way it's been explained to me from the archaeobotanists who have done replication studies is that you knock the seeds into or pull up the plant or the top of the plant and put it into your basket, and you end up doing this winnowing thing so you can get the seeds away from the chaff, that kind of thing. And then what you do is parch the seeds over a fire and eat them that way. You put them into stews. Some people have told me that you can grind them up and turn them into some kind of a flour. So what's important to know is that with the research by folks about the Eastern Agricultural Complex, the starchy and oily seeded aspect of it, enhanced with the squash, the nutritional value of this suite of plants, and it's not just these 5, there are others too. Wreck knotweed was one of them, I said, but there's also little barley and giant ragweed and amaranth and a couple of others. These are the ones that occur most often. Anyway, the nutritional value of these plants together is really very good. High nutrition, oils, and so forth, such that along with the animal foods that these folks ate, it was a pretty balanced diet. And to me, it sounds counterintuitive, but their diet was like way better than the diet of the farmers, because the farmers went in hard for corn, and corn's nutritional value isn't quite as good as these guys here. It was very interesting. It seemed counterintuitive to me, but the paleoethnobotanists who study these things, replicate these things, come up with the calories and the nutritional values and so forth, have studied this, and this is what they've concluded. It's kind of cool. Who knew, right? Okay, this is where I ended up. Any others, Beverly?
Well, there are 3 more or maybe 4 more questions now, but we can continue and then maybe get to these near the end.
Okay, so okay, good. All right, cool. Hunter, gatherer, farmers. What time we got? Oh dear. It's 5:50. Shoot, I better get going. Okay. Hunter-gatherer farmers, AD 1000 to 1750. Just exactly what it says, hunter-gatherer farmers. They grew the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, initially lived in circular villages like their ancestors did, in probably the same number or maybe a little larger villages, permanent villages, and they were surrounded by their fields. The Three Sisters agricultural system, corn, beans, and squash, is a very sustainable agricultural system. The corn is nitrogen removing, the beans are nitrogen fixing, the squash grow down out along the corn hills, and it's very sustainable, very sustainable. This triumvirate of plants, there are triumvirate of plants, not exactly like these, but a triumvirate throughout indigenous life agricultural systems across the world. In our world, in our area, for Native peoples, the plants were squash, corn, and beans. Please note that squash is a continuation from their ancestors. Corn is not, neither is the common bean. These are the kinds of tools that they used to prepare their fields, the digging stick, but also hoes made of scapula, deer scapula, or thick, heavy freshwater mussels. And you see examples there with the hole on the bottom right. Squash, you saw this picture before. Corn, Zea maize. It was domesticated in Mexico, came up through the Southwest and across the plains to arrive in east of the Mississippi River around 1000 AD. Some people will suggest that corn arrived earlier, but was not used as a foodstuff, but more as a ritual plant, because they do find corn pollen in some of the sites of the hunter-gatherer gardeners. And then the common bean. The beans on the top are charred beans from a site in Mason County. The beans on the left are non-charred and the charred ones, showing Bill Best's 4 different kinds of beans, his heirloom beans: regular beans, cut short beans, fall October beans, and the little ones at the bottom, grit beans. When Bill took a look at the charred beans that we had recovered from our hunter-gatherer farmer site, he feels quite confident that all 4 of these kinds of beans, of his heirloom beans, that the Native peoples also grew. They had to store their food, and I haven't talked about this prior to, but these farming peoples are the only ones who built these kind of storage facilities. This is called a bell-shaped pit, oddly enough, because it looks like a bell. And you can see an example in real life in the upper left-hand corner, one that we excavated just a quarter of it. That's just a quarter of it at a site in Boone County, Kentucky. This example of a bell-shaped pit with the kinds of plants that were stored in them. We have to remember that Native peoples, without having abilities to store food like we do today, they had to find a way to store their food through those long winter months when nothing was growing. They would dry stuff, they would salt stuff, and they would put things in these deep bell-shaped pits that archaeologists who have done replication studies have discovered that the spoilage rates are less than 5% and only at the top of these particular storage pits. Note the circle at the bottom of this slide. Here's a Native guy with his bow and arrow and all the different kinds of actual arrowheads. The one that's circled is like the one, though broken, this one's broken, like the one that was found at Flora Cliff. And where was it found at Flora Cliff? I am glad you asked. It was found by Trails End Lodge. Trails End Lodge, yes. And Beverly and I were chatting around thinking, well, is it really where it belongs? Or did somebody pick it up, anybody pick it up, Native American or not Native American, and drop it there at Trails End? That's the point on the left. It is an arrowhead. It's called Madison Triangular, but it's the triangular point. The way that these points are made are a little different than the way that Kirk Side Notched Point would have been made. These are tiny ones made on flakes of chert. The Kirk Side Notched points are made on thicker, chunkier pieces of chert. Let's take a look at the map here, you guys. You can see the dot by Trails End Lodge. That would be the bottom right-hand red dot. Okay, so it's up there on the top. It's on a flatter spot. And again, like I said, just because we don't have any evidence of Native people's village on this property doesn't mean that a village wasn't too far away and people were out here hunting and dropped their point. Although I think Beverly has a very good point to suggest that, you know, there's been a lot of disturbance in the Trails End area and somebody could have found this point, lost it, and there we have found it now. The closest Indian village to this place that I can the closest one is a circular village that was occupied around 1250, 1300, out 8th and Boonesboro Road. Well, that's within, you know, walking distance of this area here. It's possible that somebody who lived in that village could have dropped that there. Okay, same plants and same and animals. This is what their pottery looks like in the upper right, upper part of this slide. These folks are particularly known for using animal bone and animal teeth as ornaments. You'll see over there on the right-hand side, elk canine and a bear tooth and a dog tooth that have been pierced. Marine shell, still with the trading going on, and a smoking pipe, examples from these farming people's villages. Bone tools on the left, these are pins, bone pins, and interesting circular sandstone objects that we're not exactly sure what they are, but they might be, some people have suggested they could be spindle whorls for drop spindle yarn production. Okay, the eve of written history, 1539, 1730. This is a time period that's incorporated within the, 1539 to 1750, 1000 to 1750 time period. But this particular time period is when Native peoples are sharing the North American continent now with early Europeans. Their lives are going to be irrevocably changed. But from 1539 to about the 1690s, they continued to live their farming way of life. They lived in large villages, now no longer small rectangular houses around a circular plaza, but larger villages with larger houses scattered across the landscape. In the winter and fall, the able-bodied would go to hunting camps for periods of time. And you can see a hunting camp example here on the lower right. Same plants that they grew, same animals. Their pottery changes over time so that the style of it, so archaeologists can tell the difference between ones before 1500 and after 1500. And exchange for marine shell ornaments becomes more involved at this time. Here are examples of smoking pipes, marine shell ornaments. These are the three little things that look like little, well, marine shells, because they are, in the center top, and other kinds of ornaments that these folks used in their ceremonies, or simply day to day wearing shell beads. These disc beads on the bottom would have been like necklaces or bracelets. These folks around in Kentucky, probably around the early 1600s, started to become involved in indirect contact with Europeans and on the native exchange routes that were originally bringing mussel shells, marine mussel shells and other kinds of marine shells into central Kentucky. These kinds of copper and brass ornaments appear either as ornaments or they come as fragments of the copper pots that the native peoples then roll into beads and wear. You can see some ornament there and beads and tubes in the upper left-hand corner particularly well. And you can see the cordage that would have been threaded through these copper beads on the lower left-hand side. And then in the 1690s, the first smallpox arrives in the Ohio Valley, or that's the best guess from the paleodemographers. Just like the coronavirus, which is a novel, new virus that no one has immunity to, and you can see the impact it's having on our lives and health today. In a complementary, but not exactly complementary way, when smallpox arrived, it too was a non-native virus, easily passed from person to person. In this case, however, they didn't know until much later about vaccinations. And when this virus arrived, it was something so unheard of. And their doctors couldn't do anything to help them either. It really, well, and it impacted, smallpox itself impacted most heavily the older people who are the keepers of native heritage and traditions, but also the young kids too. And so what happened was anywhere between 75 and 90% of native peoples who lived in the Ohio Valley died after the very first appearance of smallpox. Because even if you survived the disease itself, depending on the time when that disease arrived, say, for example, to your region, it came when it was time to harvest the corn and everyone was sick and the corn didn't get harvested. And so it was a very, very long winter and spring before you could get back up on your feet again. What this means is that certain cultural groups disappeared and others joined together because at this time, most peoples in the Ohio Valley and in central Kentucky were farming peoples. They had a similar way of life. The next period is when Europeans come in person to the Ohio Valley, but I'll stop there and leave you with this picture of the diverse native peoples, their different life ways in this one region through time. And we have evidence at Flora Cliff for the hunter-gatherers and for the hunter-gatherer farmers, whether or not they farmed at Flora Cliff or not. We've got evidence for them being in this area. So thank you very much. And Beverly, shall we take the questions that are still around? Do we have some time?
Yes.
Yeah, looks like we do.
Yeah. So Lee was asking, how large were the villages in the hunter-gatherer-gardener era?
Good question. The circular villages towards the end of the era were about, well, not much, well, pretty much the same size, you know, I think. Those circular villages hunter-gatherer gardener villages were probably 300 people, maybe. Certainly not 500. The biggest ones would have been maybe 300 or 400 people. Smallest ones could have been 100. Earlier in time, those villages are earlier hunter-gatherer gardener villages are not nearly as easy to find. And I don't know what's up with that, but there you have it. These mound building people's villages or camps are hard to find. And it's difficult to say how many people lived in those villages. My guess is fewer people. And it is inferred that the number of people buried in these burial mounds were that a number of groups shared particular burial mounds, and they would come together such that the burial mounds were on the edges of people's territories, and they came together to bury their dead in the same mounds and would have gatherings where they would meet and find people that they would, would marry and that kind of thing. So that's a really good question. I don't know how big those earlier villages were, but the later ones I bet were 300.
Gwynn, so I have a photo on my phone from Deborah. I'm gonna see if this works. Looks like it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I have to read the question too.
I can read the question. She says, I found a small.
What the heck is that?
She found a small, interestingly shaped chisel marked stone in a Kentucky creek. I have long wondered if it is a Native American artifact. Who might I contact to inquire about it?
Okay, well, clearly not me. I don't know what the heck that is. That's very interesting. Okay, here's what we can do. We can send this picture to me and I will share it with colleagues of mine who may have seen something like this. And just let us know when you send it, whether it was a small stream or a large stream, if it was in the stream, on the side of the stream, that kind of thing. Because it's true, if this is a cultural object, and I've just finished saying how long Native peoples have been here. This thing could have rolled downhill from something higher up, or a number of different, gosh, that is wacky. How big is it?
So I think some people maybe can't see the picture. So if you can't see the picture, then you may want to change the view to either like side-by-side gallery so that you can see me, Josie, and Gwynn rather than just side-by-side speaker.
Oh, should I stop sharing my screen? Would that help?
Oh yeah, that may help too.
Okay, let me do that. Stop sharing. Stop. Oh, there you go. It's much bigger.
Yeah, and maybe I just talk so that it shows the speaker view of, of me showing this.
Wow, I don't know. That is really, is it a hard rock? Is it clay? Is it?
So Deborah might have to answer that, and I don't know if we can let her talk, or she might just have to.
She could either use the chat or the Q&A. Oh, she says the object is apparently a fragment. It appears broken in half. I think it is stone.
Thinks it's stone. Okay. Well, gee, I don't know. That is wacky. Okay. So this is the thing to do, Deborah. Take pictures of it from front, side, back, whatever. Send them to me. I'll take a look at it, show it to some colleagues, and we'll see what we can do. Although I've got to tell you, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to figure this out. Man, that is so wacky.
And I can put you both in touch.
All right, that'd be good. It almost looks like, okay, don't quote me on this, but I'm just riffing on this. But doesn't it look kind of so cool? It almost looks like cuneiform or something, doesn't it? It's crazy. That is, I've never seen anything like it.
Can you tell my arm's getting tired?
Yes, I can. Please stop, Josie, stop.
Thank you.
I'm useless to her. I can't help. I'm useless.
All right, so the next question, Dawn is asking, when did domesticated dogs appear in Kentucky?
Domesticated dogs came with the folks across the Bering Land Bridge. They are man's best friend, and I mean it. And you know, I only recently have noticed that the images that I use of the Lifeways scenes, almost all, frankly, all of them have a dog in them. All of them have a dog. In fact, the one for the hunter-gatherers, the later hunter-gatherers, the dog is chewing. I just noticed this year. The dog is chewing on a shoe. I'm thinking, of course, Native Americans had shoes. Dogs were chewing on their shoes too, you know. These dogs, here's an interesting fact to amaze your friends. And this is not something that happened in central Kentucky, but it did definitely happen in along the Green River in western Kentucky. The hunter-gatherers lived along the Green River during that period of time and created huge shell middens along the Green River. Unique kind of site type. Many of them are on the National Register, and as a group, they are considered a National Historic Landmark. These people, called the Green River Shell Mound Archaic people, buried their dogs like in their own separate graves, but sometimes buried them with their family members. There's an enormous amount of research done on dogs. These dogs were, I mean, they weren't Great Danes or anything like that. They're more like terriers, okay? They weren't poodles, and they weren't chihuahuas either. And these dogs, the research that these folks have done on these dogs found in archaeological sites. Now, the ones that are sort of the most famous and well known in Kentucky are the ones along the Green River. But Native American sites in other time periods in Kentucky, you can find a dog here and there, although not buried with as much care and love as the dogs were buried in the Green River area. So researching the dogs' skeletons indicate that they lived a hard life. There's evidence for unquestionably that they were used for as beasts of burden. You've heard of travois, where you've seen them maybe on the plains where the horse was hooked up with this sort of sled-like thing that was dragged along behind the horse. Well, they set up the dogs that way too, because before the arrival of the horse, well, the second arrival of the horse, first horses were here in the Pleistocene before people got here. But the horses that Native peoples used in historic times were ones that had gotten away from the Spaniards. That's the only dog's the only domesticated beast of burden besides people until the horse arrives, like in the 1500s. So these dogs were used for hunting, as hunting companions. They were used as beasts of burden, and people also ate them too. So, and used their bones for ornaments, and their teeth for ornaments too. So the very first, the dog came over with humans and has stayed.
Molly wants to know about the mound on Old Frankfort Pike, the Adena Mound. Is that from this period, which was a while ago? So I don't remember when she asked that question.
Okay, the mound on Old Frankfort Pike.
And she says, I believe it's called Adena Mound. Is that?
Well, there are a host of Adena mounds. I didn't use the term Adena. That's a term that archaeologists have given to some of the hunter-gatherer gardeners. I would say the closest Well, I said the closest mounds to Flora Cliff were down there in the Silver Creek drainage. Old Frankfort Pike, okay, I don't know of any Indian mounds on Old Frankfort Pike. Now, I do know of an Adena sacred circle. Okay, I left out that part because, you just can't say everything. But with a question, I can answer it in this way. The people who built the burial mounds also built earthworks, circular earthworks. And out Mount Horeb Pike is Adena Mound Park that the University of Kentucky owns. And that is a sacred circle. Native peoples built that for ceremonies and so forth. There is an Adena mound out. It's called the Roosevelt Mound because the Roosevelts used to own the property there. Out Ironworks Road. There's an Adena mound in Mount Sterling. They're on the bypass. There's one south of Richmond on the interstate called the Coy Mound. It's to the right as you're going south near where the old rest area used to be.
Molly is saying that she had the wrong location. It's Mount Horeb.
Okay, there you go. Good. All right, thank you. I was just thinking to myself, wait, I did all kinds of surveys out Old Frankfort Pike. Did I miss a mound? Well, there is a sacred circle out there in Woodford County, and you would go out Old Frankfort Pike and hang a left if you were going to Frankfort. Yes, Mount Horeb, sacred circle, partially excavated by W.S. Webb and the WPA people during the Depression. Recently, an archaeologist by the name of Ed Henry did his dissertation research on Adena sacred circles, and he has found, and this is new, awesomely interesting information, he has found that the Adena sacred circles, and he looked at the one at Adena Mound or Adena Park, there's one in the next field, next to Adena Park. You can't see it unless you stand on your head and whistle Dixie in a full moon. And then there's others out in Indian Oldfields. He looked at two. Earthwalker is one, and that other one is CK7, whose name escapes me now. Anyway, his research has and then there's the Lebus Circle, which is in Bourbon County. So there's these circular earthworks. Some of them are built up and some of them are dug down and the soil is thrown out. These circular earthworks were built by the hunter-gatherer gardeners, but they were used even by the hunter-gatherer farmers. He has found evidence of those people's artifacts on these sites. He infers that these were places, unique, sacred places that everyone knew about on the landscape, and the people after those who had built them maintained these as sacred places and did their own kinds of ceremonies at these circular earthwork sites. Fascinating, significant, sacred places on the landscape that Native peoples knew about. No one knew this until Ed started doing his research on specifically targeting these circular earthworks. Boy, I'm glad you asked me that so I could share that, because it's just so exciting. It shows incredible depth and connectivity of these Native peoples with their land. It's really very interesting research that he's done.
Charlie is asking, the book Archaeology in Kentucky refers to a paleo kill zone where they drove or cornered prey down a ridge with steep cliffs in the Clays Ferry area as one of the few sites east of the Mississippi. Do you know exactly where it is? Flora Cliffs Bird Hill Ridge looks like a likely site.
Well, that's a good question. I've only heard it called the Clays Ferry Crevice because it was a crevice near Clays Ferry in Madison County. There have been I don't know about I don't know about running the animals off the cliff or not. I can't speak to that one way or the other. I will say that Big Bone Lick, they have found Paleo-Indian points there, but not in association with the animals. And then several sites in eastern Kentucky have produced Paleo-Indian points. So I can't speak to whether the Clay Sperry crevice site is the oldest Paleo-Indian site in Kentucky or not. I can't say that. I don't know. But if the Kentucky Archaeology book, edited by Barry Lewis, available at your local library or online through Kentucky Libraries Unbound, if that's what those guys say in that book, who am I to quibble with that?
Rob wants to know any evidence or speculation about spiritual practice of Native peoples in our region, evidence for shamanistic practice.
Okay, now I'm going to be honest with you guys. You can't dig up beliefs. As archaeologists, we can't dig up beliefs. And Native peoples' oral traditions will speak to the rituals that they and their ancestors and then their ancestors and their ancestors do. And I don't know how far back their oral histories go. Having said that, based on anthropological research worldwide about hunting and gathering peoples, hunting and gathering gardening peoples, I am going to say that these folks had shamans or spiritual leaders or religious leaders, because all humans have religious beliefs that they hold to explain what is unexplainable to humans. Shamanistic beliefs are a kind of, having shamans is a kind of religious belief. Like, for example, in contrast, world religions like Christianity, Judaism, Islam is a kind of religion, okay? Then there are kinds of religion that's called animistic beliefs. Shamans are connected with that. Animistic belief systems mean, in some cases, are characterized by incredible diversity, but a generalized appreciation for the fact that all things have a spirit, animals, plants, rocks, things like that. From an animistic perspective, you are going to thank the plants, you're going to thank the animals for giving themselves up for you to use as food. Shamans in some places in the world foretell the future by reading bones. I don't know if Native peoples did that here or not. The ritual practices of the hunting, gathering gardeners, the Adena people, and the Hopewell people, the ones who built the mounds and circular earthworks, is an incredible elaboration of a kind of animistic belief system. It's amazing, involving rare, non-local objects like marine shell and copper and mica and obsidian, and colored soils and star lunar, and not just lunar, but Venus orientations in the sky. One of the things that I learned when I went out to the Southwest and was fortunate enough to listen to an archaeoastronomy presentation by a guy who had researched that in the Southwest all his life. He said something that stuck with me. We 21st century people have forgotten to look at the skies. Our lights continue day for us. And what it does, it steals the night from us. Native peoples watched the stars, watched the moon, knew those planets, those stars, that moon and Venus. In fact, the farming peoples planted by the solstices and the equinoxes, and they were completely attuned to celestial bodies. And the Newark earthworks, for example, up in Ohio, just incredible lunar orientations of where the breaks are in these earthworks. So an animism, a shamanism, a connection to the significance of the circularity of life, the role that smoke plays, the importance of animals that can be at one point in their life amphibious, living in the water, and then at other times in their life live on land. That incredible transitional aspect of some animals, all of these things for some groups across Kentucky's Native history were a part of some groups' belief systems. It's amazing, fascinating, and when a question like that comes to me, it makes me realize how very little we know and how very little we can know for sure from the objects that these people left behind. It makes me sad that we can't, that we can't know more about it. And the fact that the Native peoples today have been divorced from their homelands, there would have been Native names for all of these creeks and all of these fords that would have been there in the Kentucky River. And you think of the knobs at Berea, each one would have had a name, and each mound would have had a name and a lineage. And we don't know any of that. And we're the poorer for it.
Right, ready for the next question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got 4 more here. Lee says, if there is time, tell us more about the Kentucky Archaeology Survey and what it does and how it is supported.
Okay. The Kentucky Archaeological Survey's mission is to educate, provide a service to people who want archaeological work done, and to do research. We are housed at Western Kentucky University. We're a program of the Folk Studies and Anthropology Department. Our offices are in the basement of Cherry Hall, which is the big building on the top of the Hilltoppers, that has the chimes in the afternoon and everything. It's really great. We work with students. We offer opportunities for them to get hands-on experiential learning for archaeological research. Like the crew will go to a piece of property in the Daniel Boone National Forest next week for a week, surveying for the Daniel Boone National Forest, looking for archaeological sites to record. This summer, even in COVID land, the crew worked on an archaeological site outside of Bowling Green. It was a portion of a village site that was going to be impacted by a bridge replacement. So we also prepare videos and lesson plans and exhibits. There are booklets. Our new website is up. You can download all kinds of things. And I want to share with you our newest thing, KAS Radio. Our very first episode was last month, and our second episode will be this month. I don't know if any of you all know, but Think History short radio spots on WEKU, created by WEKU and Kentucky Humanities. There are radio spots about archaeology, and we've been given the okay by Kentucky Humanities to have link on our website to the radio spot, but also you will see a PDF with images illustrating the script of the radio spot, and also three documentary resources that you could go look for to learn more about the particular topic about the radio spot.
So should they look for that to watch or to listen to the radio show, look for that on the survey site?
KAS Radio is on the KAS website, which is, oddly enough, www.Kentucky Archaeological Survey, all one word, .org.
Nathan is wondering about, are mounds present near the Athens Road site? And if not, do you know where the people are buried?
I don't think that there is a burial mound affiliated with the circular village there off of Athens Boonesboro Road. I think it's just the village. Native peoples buried their dead in mounds. The farming peoples buried their dead in low burial mounds. The mounds were oftentimes in the plaza, to the side of the plaza. But this one, it's called the Guilfoyle Village because Mr. and Mrs. Guilfoyle, it occurred on their property. Guilfoyle Village, I don't think there's a mound there. The native peoples also buried their dead in a zone around the plaza. So if you were looking down on an Indian village, a circular Indian farming village, what you would see is the plaza. And then out from that was the cemetery zone. And then out from that was where all the houses were. And then out from that would be where all the trash would be. That's one way to organize it. But different groups of people organize their homes, their landscape, their towns in different ways. So other farming peoples arranged their towns, their villages. The plaza is always in the center. Their houses around the plaza, their trash pits and their burials in back of the houses. So there's many different ways to arrange a circular village, and native farming peoples buried their dead in shallow pits in the ground, extended on their backs with objects that were significant to the person.
Right, so Charlie is asking, is the circular earthwork mound north of Ironworks Pike, Mount Horeb Pike, an example of a hunter-gatherer-gardener community?
It is an example of a hunter-gatherer-gardener ritual site. Although, you know, frankly, when you start thinking about it, what's a community? It's not just your house, right? It's like the grocery store you go to, and the church you go to, and the playground you go to, and the bar you go to, and blah, blah, blah. So I suppose it could be then considered the hunter-gatherer-gardener community, because the community would be the homeland, the places where they lived, moving from place to place, or staying in one place and then going out and coming back seasonally, back and forth, and then their ritual sites. So perhaps I could consider it a part of their community. Yeah, their ritual site, their church.
Lucia wants to know, is there evidence of what kind of relationships groups had with one another?
Well, you know, like you can't dig up beliefs, it's difficult to dig up relationships. However, we can infer the size of family groups from the size of houses and the house floors. Now I'm going to get over in the weeds here. Come with me here. This is deeply nerdy, archy stuff. Okay. A house has X number of square feet, usable square feet. An anthropologist looked at all the different traditional people's houses and measured the average size of their house floors, and then how many people lived in the house, and came up with a mathematical equation that could infer how many people had lived in that house. So if you have a rectangular house and that's 6 meters by 6 meters or 10 by 5 or what have you, you can infer the number of people that would have lived in the house. If there's lots of people that live in the house, and you remember the picture, I hope, of the houses of the farming peoples that kind of look like longhouses, what we think of longhouses in New York, Iroquois longhouses. These were like Iroquois longhouses, although they weren't Iroquois people. We don't think. So the suggestion there is that a lineage or clan would live in that in those houses, or multiple lineages of a clan would live in houses next to each other. And so you'd have family, say 4 families in one house. Well, you can only imagine the relationships in the house. Shall I suggest the challenging relationships people are experiencing during the pandemic when you're living on top of each other? Some people get along really fine. Other people have personal space issues. Some have anger issues, others not. So the interpersonal relationships, based on the anthropology of traditional farming societies, there are relationships such that people who are older have more respect. People have more respect. Older men and women are given more respect. In terms of political relationships, these hunter-gatherer farmers, you were a leader if you showed personal ability in leadership. You were not born into that relationship. You were not, it wasn't a stratified society. It wasn't heredity for leadership in these farming villages. There would have been economic relationships with groups further away. The nature of exchange for let's say the hunter-gatherer farmer people was a kind of reciprocal exchange, and down the line exchange, reciprocal exchange. What I mean by that is, if you've got something that I want, then I'm going to exchange with you, but you might have something that you want that somebody else has that's like, miles away from where I live. Things can move between groups in an economic way, economics, trade and exchange, barter, and etc. from place to place to place, and an object can move hundreds or thousands of miles just in that way. So you have these economic interpersonal relationships with people. And it's my understanding from the anthropological literature of economies, particularly in traditional farming societies, that traditional farming peoples economic relationships are built on social relationships, so that your buying and selling, or your trading, is like a kind of gift giving where you become beholden to each other. It's not like the kind of economic relationships that we have in our society today necessarily, except, when you get a really really lame Christmas gift from somebody, you think to yourself, you know, I gave them a really nice gift and they have given me a lame gift, and that wasn't right. That wasn't equal. So if that was the question about relationships, economic relationships, social relationships based on gender and age and personal qualities, I would say characterize the Native peoples in Central Kentucky throughout most time, because there were no stratified societies in Central Kentucky. There were out in Western Kentucky, but not in Central Kentucky.
We have a couple more questions here that have come in. Are you doing okay on time?
Well, I mean,
we're a little over.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I mean, so long as, I mean, you know, I can talk forever here. As you can tell, I just won't shut up. So if people have questions, I'm prepared to answer them. Because see, if this was non-COVID land, right, we would have returned to trails and people would have left. I'd be chatting with people in small groups, answering questions, you know. So.
All right. So the next question from Charlie, you showed pics of pipes. What did they smoke? When did tobacco arrive in this area?
Ooh, good question. I don't know, but I do know that the farming peoples grew tobacco. Nicotiana rustica, which very high. And we were fortunate enough at this one archaeological site, hunting, gathering, farming site in Mason County. I don't know how many of you all have ever seen a tobacco seed, but it is not a large seed. It's like the size of the period at the end of a sentence that maybe you've made a little bit bigger than a period at the end of the sentence. And so we found tobacco seed. The archaeobotanist is looking at the seeds under the microscope, the charred wood that he's gotten, charred plant remains, and he's like, wow, look at that. Tobacco seeds, you know, have a unique signature, just like all seeds do, many seeds do. And so, you know, we know that they had, they grew tobacco. We know that ethnohistorically, there's a kind of a substance called kinnikinick, which is a combination of tobacco and sassafras and some other things too. I'm not exactly sure, but the smoking pipes, I want to say that they started certainly by the hunter-gatherer gardeners. I don't know about the hunter-gatherers per se or not, but maybe, you know, and you know, it's the reason why we know about the pipes at all is because these pipes that we find are made of stone, carved stone, sometimes fine-grained sandstone, sometimes siltstone, sometimes limestone. But if native peoples had used pipes that were not made of stone, some pipes are made of clay. I mean, yeah, what are you going to find out of a corncob pipe? If it's just the corncob and, like, you know, pipe stem, you're not going to find it at all. I don't know what they would have used, the hunter-gatherer guys, folks, women, people, what they would have used instead. I don't know. That's a good question. When did pipes start? Gee, I don't know. Charlie has some very good questions.
There are a couple of Charlies in there.
Oh, okay. Well, the Charlies have very good questions.
Lucia had kind of followed up on her question about relationships, that she was interested in between one community group and another. So she meant, like, did they cooperate on hunting, etc.?
Ah, very good. Okay. Intergroup relationships. Some people will suggest that, particularly the hunting, gathering, farming peoples, that they married outside of their village. So the relationships would be exogamous, for those of you who want to get those anthro terms in there, marrying out. It's possible that the hunter-gatherers also did the same thing. Connectivity across the landscape. Archaeologists have begun to document quite clearly that identifiable cultural groups appear in Kentucky at least by the middle period of that hunting gathering time. So between 8,000 and 1,000 BC, identifiable cultural groups are there. When I say that, I mean that certain regions have certain kinds of stone tool types and other kinds of things that indicate that they are an interacting group in that particular region. So intergroup relationships, exchange in trade, okay, exchange, and this would be materials of local production as well as things that would be moving through of non-local production, exchange of wives and husbands, exchange of ideas. How far would these relationships extend geographically? That's a good question. We know that the native peoples in central Kentucky traded with the farming peoples in Tennessee. So those relationships could be very far extended. But the idea in my mind, particularly for the hunting, gathering, farming peoples, in a balloon, if you're looking at central Kentucky, you've got villages sprinkled about, and their fields, their farm fields, are around the village. And then there's this network of animal trails and people trails that crisscross all across the Bluegrass, and people are, connecting with each other routinely.
All right, so Bill is asking, can you say a few words about the Cahokia site in southern Illinois near St. Louis?
Wow. So, wow. Cahokia has a wood henge, right? Everyone knows this, right? A wood henge, like a stone henge, only made out of wood. Actually, it's got a couple of them. Actually, they've reconstructed it, or one of them. Actually, at the solstices, you can go and watch it happen at Cahokia. Holy smokes. Huh. It's just amazing. Cahokia is one of the, if not the, well, the mound, Monk's Mound at Cahokia, is the largest earthen structure in North America. Native peoples built it. Native hunting, gathering, farming peoples built it. And it's smaller than it was when they built it. What a place. Archaeologists argue about whether it was urban or not. Cahokia really was a fantastic place, an amazing place, and a very fragile place. It hung out for a couple of 100 years, and that was it. These hunting and gathering and farming peoples are stratified. You are the ruler, and your son is the ruler, or you're the chief, and your son's the chief, and your grandson's the chief, and your great-grandson's the chief. And that's about it. And that's over. Incredible long-distance exchange, marvelous connection with other mound centers all across the Southeast. Amazing. This one, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to go to the museum at Cahokia. If you haven't, you must. It is so amazing. This one guy was buried in one of the mounds, not the big mound, this little lame mound, on a layer of marine shell ornaments and bundle burials, cremated bundle burials of people were around him. And there were, and the archaeologists were very glad to see that they had done their classification correct about the arrowheads. There were bundles of arrowheads from different regions showing the different styles around him. There was this, oh gosh, there was this place that they found, this burial area that they found with, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was sacrificial virgins, you know. I mean, what? This was in Cahokia, East St. Louis. It is an amazing site. Mississippian culture is an amazing culture. If you are interested in Cahokia and the culture and the Mississippian belief systems and so forth linked to Cahokia, this marvelous book you must get. It's called Hero, Hawk, and Open Hand. It is the book that goes along with an exhibit that was in the Field Museum and several other large museums in the United States. It is a collaboration of Native peoples and archaeologists. The objects in the book are amazing, and the articles in there describe the cosmology of Mississippian people, the tree of life, and the various levels of various levels of cosmology, the warrior class, the ancestor cults. Oh my goodness. And Cahokia was the biggest dog of all. It's really an amazing site. Amazing site.
Right, so I think we have one more question here and some nice comments. Lauren is asking, well, she says, thank you for this talk. What
Very welcome.
do contemporary Native peoples have in archaeological work in Kentucky?
Contemporary Native peoples who see Kentucky as their homeland include the Shawnee people, all three tribes, the Cherokee people, the ones out in Oklahoma, as well as the ones in Tennessee. The Tutelo people see Kentucky as a homeland. There are others who in historic times saw Kentucky as home. That would have been the Mingo Seneca. The Chickasaw also saw Kentucky as a homeland. Unfortunately, in Kentucky, we don't have any native reservations. And so I think sometimes that's part of the reason why people think Indians never lived in Kentucky permanently, but only hunted here. The Shawnee are linked to Eastern and Central Kentucky, the Cherokee in Southeastern Kentucky, the Tutelo in Southeastern Kentucky, the Chickasaw out in the Jackson Purchase. These Native peoples finally have enough resources to invest in language. Well, it's not like they weren't shepherding their languages before, but now they can, because they have the resources, they can take very active roles in teaching children the technologies and the languages. They are building museums. They are taking much more active, they're really, after these 500 years, Native peoples are really becoming are coming into their own in a way that they never have before. David Pollock and I have been very fortunate to be asked by Shawnee tribes to work with them to critically discover whether or not the shell-tempered pottery, the hunter-gatherer farmer pottery that have been found in these village sites, how directly linked is it to Shawnee traditional pottery making? And working with these Native people has been an absolute joy, and so humbling, and has made me realize that the archaeological work that I do is about their history. And I need to be much more respectful than I was in my youth, and more cognizant about what it is I'm studying. I think in time there will be many indigenous people who are archaeologists themselves, and that will open up a whole new dynamic, I think, of interpretation and study.
Right, so the rest of the comments here are all, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. Your passion really brings the past to life. I just want to say how much I've enjoyed listening and learning. You're amazing. Thank you. This was excellent. Thank you. This was fascinating.
I'm so glad. This is great.
It has been great. And then Deborah provided a little bit more information about her object, which we'll put in an email as well. It's a little over an inch long and less than an inch wide. So,
wow, it's a little thing.
Yeah.
In the picture, it looks like it's, the rock that ate Cleveland. It's just a little thing. Wow, the fact that she could even see it to pick it up, that's amazing. Eyes. That's great. Yeah, let's take a look. We'll see.
So if anybody else has any comments or questions, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be sure that Gwynn gets those. But thank you, Gwynn, and thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's so much fun. I just wish I could have, I just wish we all could have been together, around a campfire, talking, eating some quinoa, which is a kind of quinopodium, or acorns. No, not acorns, butternuts, or walnuts or something, deer meat. I don't know.
Maybe we can do that next year.
Okay, that sounds good. I'm here. I'll come out. We'll do it.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. You all, please stay safe and take care. Thank you for having me, Beverly. Thank you for having me, Josie.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend.
All right. So Gwynn, there are just a couple more comments here that I'll read out to you while they're here. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you. I feel so fortunate to have been there
Okay, I'll stay.
when it was explored. And then thanks so much, Gwynn and Beverly and Josie, for a very interesting talk.
Yeah.
And Ellen said her book's already.
I don't know, guys. I think this.
Kentucky.
Okay. Oh yeah, fun, awesome. I got to tell you, this webinar thing works. You had 50 some people attend. That's really good.
Yeah.
This kind of outreach is working.
And we had a few others that couldn't make it live tonight, but they'll get the recording.
Great.
And let's see. Oh yeah, a few other comments here. Great talk. Thanks everyone. Wish we could stay longer. So very much enjoyed. Thank you. So.
Yay. Yay. Keep up the good work there at Flora Cliff, you guys.
Right, you too.
All right. Have a good weekend. Thanks for having me. See ya.
See you soon.
Bye.